Day Sylvia Okafor walked into that boardroom, she already knew something was wrong. She couldn't name it then. It was the kind of feeling that lives in your chest before your brain catches up, a tightening like the air had been swapped out for something thinner. She'd been in dozens of boardrooms. She knew what a room felt like when it was waiting for you. And this one was waiting. She was 53 years old, a structural engineer with 26 years at Kellerman and Voss, one of the oldest civil engineering firms in Cincinnati. She had designed 3 bridges that still stood. She had rebuilt a flood-damaged water treatment facility in a county that couldn't afford to hire anyone else. She had won the ASC Outstanding Projects Award in 2019, and the framed certificate sat in her office next to a photo of her daughter's college graduation, slightly crooked because she'd never gotten around to straightening it. None of that was visible the morning she sat down at the long mahogany table and looked across at Gerard Hollis. Gerard Hollis was the firm's new executive director of infrastructure projects. He had been with the company for 14 months. Sylvia had been there for 26 years. He was 41. She was 53. He had a firm handshake and a habit of using words like synergy and deliverables in sentences where simpler words would have worked fine. He had an MBA from Northwestern and had never, as far as Sylvia could tell, designed anything that would bear weight. He smiled at her when she sat down. She had learned over time that his smile was the most unreliable thing about him. The meeting had been called to review the preliminary load calculations for the Crestview Overpass expansion, a project Sylvia had been lead engineer on for the past 8 months. It was a big contract. Federal money, the kind of thing that got your name in trade publications if you did it right. The room held 7 people: Sylvia, Gerard, 2 junior engineers from her team named Kevin and Rosa, the firm's CFO, a project manager named Dale, and a man from the Federal Oversight Office named Thomas Birch, who had flown in from D.C. and looked like he would rather be somewhere else. Gerard opened his laptop and pulled up the presentation. Sylvia recognized it immediately. It was her work, her months of calculations and site assessments, formatted into slides by Rosa. She watched as Gerard clicked through the first few pages, nodding as though he were seeing it for the first time. Then he stopped. He leaned forward slightly, tilting his head at the screen. "Sylvia," he said, "can you walk us through the load transfer assumptions on slide 11? She nodded and reached for the pointer. Slide 11 showed the lateral load distribution model for the eastern span. It was a clean model. She'd run it 4 times. She was 2 sentences in when Gerard interrupted her. "Wait." He held up a hand. "I'm looking at this number here." He pointed at a figure in the lower right corner of the diagram, a stress value. "Walk me through how you arrived at 2.4 megapascals for the pier base under seismic load." Sylvia looked at the number. Then she looked at it again. "That figure's 3.4, she said. Gerard blinked. "No, it's..." He looked at the screen. "It reads 2.4. "I can see what it reads on the screen," Sylvia said evenly, "but the number I submitted in the original analysis package was 3.4. The correct calculation for the pier base under the specified seismic zone classification is 3.4 megapascals. If that slide shows 2.4, something was changed after I submitted." The room got very quiet. Thomas Birch, the man from D.C., uncapped his pen. Gerard's expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes shifted, the way a card player's face shifts when they've been called. "Sylvia, I think he might be misremembering," he said, and his voice had that careful, patient quality that people use when they want to sound reasonable while saying something unreasonable. "I pulled this directly from the file on the shared drive." "Then the file on the shared drive was modified," she said, "because that is not the number I submitted." Kevin, the junior engineer on her left, had gone very still. Rosa was looking at the table. "I've been in this field for 26 years, Gerard said. "And here's the part that would stay with Sylvia for a long time, the part she would replay in her head on the drive home that night. I think I can read a stress value." He'd said it smoothly, reasonably, as though the problem were her perception, not the number. As though her 26 years were a footnote and his 14 months were the authority in the room. "What you need to understand, and this is important, is that 2.4 versus 3.4 megapascals is not a rounding error. It is not a matter of interpretation. At the seismic load classification for the Crestview site, a pier base rated to 2.4 would be undersized. Not catastrophically, not immediately, but under the right conditions. A mild earthquake, heavy traffic, years of thermal expansion and contraction. The differential would matter. The kind of matter that takes years to show up and then shows up all at once. Sylvia had known this for 26 years. She knew it the way a carpenter knows which way wood will split. She set down the pointer. "I'd like to reference my original submission," she said. "I have the time-stamped PDF in my email. This isn't the time to relitigate. Mr. Hollis." Her voice was quiet, not loud, the kind of quiet that fills a room. "A federal infrastructure contract is in this room. A representative from the oversight office is in this room. If there is a discrepancy between my submitted analysis and what appears on that slide, it needs to be identified now, not later." Thomas Birch looked up from his notepad. Gerard looked at Thomas Birch. Then he looked back at Sylvia. "I'm sure we can sort this out after the meeting." "We can sort it out in the next 5 minutes," Sylvia said, "if someone will allow me to access my email." Kevin cleared his throat. He had his laptop open. He had, Sylvia would later learn, been waiting for exactly this moment. He had, in fact, been sitting on something he didn't know whether to say for the past 3 days. "I have the original submission here," Kevin said, turning his laptop to face the room. Sylvia sent it to the project folder on March 4th, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. He paused. "The figure is 3.4. The room didn't erupt. That's the thing about moments like this. They don't explode. They settle. Like sediment dropping through water. Slowly, everything finding its level." Gerard looked at the laptop screen. He looked at the figure. The figure was 3.4. He looked at his own presentation slide. The figure was 2.4. Nobody said what that meant. Nobody had to. Thomas Birch wrote something in his notepad. Not a short something, a long something. "I'll need copies of both versions of that file," he said. "To no one in particular, but to everyone in general." What came next was not cinematic. Nobody was escorted from the building with a box of belongings and a security guard. Gerard Hollis did not break down and confess. The meeting simply suspended, and people filed out in that particular way. People file out when they all know something significant has just happened. But none of them are ready to say it out loud yet. Sylvia gathered her things. Rosa touched her arm briefly as she passed, just for a second, just enough, and then moved on. In the hallway, Dale, the project manager, fell into step beside her. He was a quiet man, the kind who had been at a company long enough to know where all the bodies were buried, but was too cautious to say so. He walked with her toward the elevator. "You okay?" he said. "I'm fine," she said. "That was—" He stopped. Started again. "You handled that well." She pressed the elevator button. "I handled it correctly," she said. "That's all." She went back to her office and sat down at her desk and didn't move for a few minutes. Outside her window, Cincinnati went about its business. The Ohio River was visible between the buildings if you looked at the right angle, gray-green and indifferent, moving the way it always moved. She had spent 26 years being careful, being meticulous, documenting everything, archiving everything, time-stamping everything, not out of paranoia exactly, but out of something adjacent to it, a knowledge quietly carried. That precision was her protection. That in rooms where her presence was not entirely welcome, accuracy was the one argument that could not be dismissed. She had been right to be careful. She had been right. That evening, she called her brother in Atlanta. His name was Raymond, and he was a high school biology teacher, and the person she trusted most in the world with anything that mattered. "What are you feeling?" he asked after she told him. "I don't know yet," she said. "Tired. A little tired." "That's reasonable." "I keep thinking about that moment when he said, 'I've been in this field for 26 years, she said. "As if my years don't exist. As if I'm just the variable he didn't account for." Raymond was quiet for a moment. But you were the variable he didn't account for. She almost laughed. Almost. The investigation began the following week. The Federal Oversight Office doesn't move slowly when a discrepancy involves infrastructure safety. Thomas Birch had flagged it the same afternoon, and by Thursday there was a formal request for file access logs, email records, and version histories on the shared drive. The version history was very clear. On March 6th, at 11:22 a.m., 2 days after Sylvia submitted her original analysis, someone had accessed the presentation file and changed a single value. The login credentials used belonged to Gerard Hollis. He would later claim it had been an accidental keystroke, an editing error. He had been reviewing the file and must have accidentally changed the number without realizing it. The investigators noted that the login had taken place during a 15-minute window, that a single specific digit in a specific cell in a complex 40-slide presentation had been changed, and that no one had flagged it internally before the meeting. They noted it without comment, the way investigators do when the facts speak with enough volume that commentary would only get in the way. Sylvia was not asked to testify at any hearing. She was asked to provide documentation, which she did methodically, as she had always done, and then she was thanked, and the process moved forward without her in the room. That was the part she had to make peace with, not the injustice of it. She had made peace with injustice years ago, or at least learned to carry it differently. But the particular peculiarity of being the person around whom something pivots while remaining outside the room where it resolves. She had spent her career in the background of decisions, designing the things that carried weight, literally, while other people presented those designs in rooms with wood-paneled walls. She had told herself that this was fine, that the work was what mattered, that the river didn't care whose name was on the blueprint as long as the bridge held. And the bridge had always held. But sitting at her desk 3 weeks later, when she received the formal email stating that Gerard Hollis had been placed on administrative leave pending review, she felt something she didn't entirely expect. Not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what it was. It was something quieter. The feeling of standing on solid ground and knowing, not hoping, not guessing, but knowing that the ground was solid because you had built it right. The Crestview Overpass project was reassigned. Sylvia remained lead engineer. The corrected figure, 3.4 megapascals, was restored in every subsequent version of the file, and the design moved forward. Kevin came to her office one afternoon about a month later. He stood in the doorway a moment before she waved him in. "I should have said something sooner," he said. "I saw the file had been changed. I noticed it 2 days before the meeting and I didn't know what to do." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said something when it mattered," she said. "That's not nothing." He nodded, relieved in the way young people are relieved when an older person doesn't punish them for their hesitation. "How did you know?" he asked. "In the room, I mean. How did you know it was wrong without looking it up?" Sylvia turned back to her computer. "Because I wrote it," she said. "And some things, once you've worked them out, you don't forget." He left, and she returned to the plans on her screen. A new project, a parking structure in blue ash, unremarkable by most standards, but with a complicated foundation condition that interested her. The soil composition was unusual. She had been looking forward to figuring it out. Outside, the Ohio River moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, consistent, carrying everything downstream to wherever downstream went. She straightened the certificate on her wall, the one that had been slightly crooked for years. Then she got back to work. I think about that moment a lot. When Sylvia looked at that number on the screen and didn't flinch, didn't second-guess herself, didn't do what most of us would do, which is quietly wonder, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm remembering it differently. Maybe it's not worth the fight. She'd earned the right not to wonder. 26 years of building things that had to hold. That kind of work either makes you precise or it breaks you. She chose precise. Every time. What strikes me most isn't that she caught the error. It's that she caught it in a room full of people who were, in various ways, expecting her not to. Gerard Hollis had credentials and a title, and the confidence of someone who had never been seriously wrong in front of an audience. Thomas Birch was from the federal government and had a plane to catch. The junior engineers on her own team had gone quiet, and still she said, "That number is wrong." That's not stubbornness. That's something harder to build than a bridge. That's a person who has done the interior work, the kind that doesn't show up on a resume, of knowing the difference between what she knows and what she merely thinks. Sylvia knew, and she held onto that knowing even when the room pushed back. There's a kind of integrity that only gets tested under pressure. Anyone can be honest when honesty is easy and cheap. The real question is, what you do when being honest costs something. When the person disagreeing with you has more institutional power. When the stakes are high enough that staying quiet would be the rational choice. Sylvia didn't take the rational choice. She took the right one. And then there's Kevin. I keep thinking about Kevin. He saw the discrepancy 2 days before the meeting and didn't say anything. And he carried that for 72 hours. And then when it mattered, he opened his laptop and turned the screen around. He didn't do it perfectly. He didn't do it early, but he did it. And Sylvia told him, "You said something when it mattered. That's not nothing." She was right. Most people in his position never say anything at all. The thing about what Gerard Hollis did, whatever his intent, is that it carried a particular kind of assumption inside it. The assumption that Sylvia's memory of her own work was less reliable than his reading of a modified file, that her 26 years were a variable he could override. That assumption is older than he is. Sylvia had been navigating it her entire career. She had built her whole professional life on a foundation that couldn't be argued with. Not credentials, not title, not connections, but accuracy. The one currency nobody can fake over time. And in the end, the version history didn't lie. The timestamp didn't lie. The number she had calculated on a late Tuesday evening in March was still there in the original file, unchanged, waiting. What I take from Sylvia's story is simple, even if it's not easy. Did the work so well that the record speaks for itself. Stay calm enough to let it. And when someone puts a wrong number in front of you and calls it yours, know yourself well enough to say otherwise, even when the room is watching. The bridge holds because someone calculated it right. Everything else is just noise.